So I cut into the property through the trees to sneak in, but Josh was literally nowhere in sight. I saw his fort, so I looked around. When I could confirm he wasn't anywhere in sight, I approached his fort to grab the jewel. Before I could, I heard a woman's voice yelling out, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I turned in the direction it came from, and it was an older woman at the front door of the neighbor's house. I called back that we're playing a game. She responded with, "Your brother's in here." I was very confused. I started walking towards the front steps of the house, and as I got closer, the woman's face got clearer. To my 8-year-old mind, she looked a lot older than she probably was. When I got closer to the house, I noticed that one of the upstairs windows, there was someone looking out at me. For a second, I actually thought it was Josh. It was someone with half their face covered, presumably by a black bean, and the bottom part of their face covered under the bottom of the window. I also noticed another trail of footprints leading to the front door. They had to be Josh's. The woman was giving me a very creepy smile. I remember that feeling of my heart dropping for some reason. She waved me inside to come in and get out of the cold. I stopped dead in my tracks and screamed, "Josh!" but there was no response. The woman stopped smiling. She didn't expect me to do that. I also noticed that the other trail of footprints was doubled over. If it was Josh, his footprint turned around and headed back towards the woods. I then heard heavy footsteps from inside the house. They sounded like they were upstairs coming down. I started to run, and the woman screamed something at me or someone else that I didn't understand. I looked back once at the house, and that face that was upstairs at the window before was no longer there. I ran off the property back on the road, running through my previous footsteps. I started to hear my dad's whistling from up the hill, the he'd do to get my brother and I home at dinner time. When I made it back to our driveway, my dad and Josh were there already, having been on their way to get me. Before I could even try to explain what just happened, Josh was already telling me that there were people in the neighbor's house telling him to come inside. I said the same exact thing happened to me. So my dad went down there with some weapon in his hand. While we waited in the home with our mom, he came back after a long while and said that the front door was locked and no one was answering. So we went to another neighbor's house, and they knew the owners of the house and they called them. This part still gives me chills whenever my dad mentions what he was told. The owners of that house were not there that weekend. Nobody was supposed to be in the house. The cops were called and everything, and my brother and I did have to speak to one of the officers on scene to describe the woman. After that, we were no longer involved. According to my dad, the back door was unlocked and the house was investigated, which turned up nothing. For this reason, my parents took home any extra valuable things in fear of a break-in while we were gone. After that day, we steered clear of playing on that property, just from the creepiness factor of that memory alone. Thank God we didn't go in that house. I've been skiing for as long as I've been able to walk. My parents used to ski competitively. That's actually how they met. So it was really important to them that my siblings and I learned as early as possible. Fast forward about 20-odd years, and that's how old I am now. This story happened to me a few winters ago when I was 21 years old. I was a senior in college. Everyone knows the best skiing accessible to the Northeast is Vermont. It was going to be a trip like any other. It was me, Jaden, Rylan, and Amir. I can't remember for the life of me what mountain we were skiing that trip, as Jaden had booked the whole thing and Rylan was driving. What I do remember was that it was massive, with 7 ski lifts covering all the different peaks. If I had to guess, it was Killington. We skied nearly 2 full days, and I'm sure there were still trails we missed. That's how big it was. It was the second day. After skiing the day before, we had a pretty good grasp on the trails we enjoyed. So this day would mostly be about testing ourselves and pushing the limits as per tradition. I'd also be lying if I said we didn't have a handful of fireball shooters to liven things up. We were having an extremely enjoyable trip. The double blacks never got boring, and racing down each slope was its own little game. We had maybe an hour left until the lifts closed. We were all exhausted, but we knew as soon as we hit the road to head home, we'd instantly miss the mountain again. We were contemplating how we would end the trip at the top of the lift, when 2 girls without their helmets made their way over to us. Now this might sound a little odd to some people, but I wouldn't be doing this story justice if I left out this detail. The girls, one brunette and one blonde, were dropped at gorgeous, and I don't say that in any type of strange way. They were just objectively two of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen in person. It was disarming. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devin, and we started making small talk. They basically told us that they were bored because the mountain was full of older folk, which was actually something I'd remarked to my friends about the day before. So it made sense why they approached us, a group of young guys that seemed around their age. Devin seemed like a really seasoned skier, as she kept asking Amir all these technical questions about his skis. Him and Rylan actually owned their own expensive skis as opposed to renting like Jaden and I always did, which the girls seemed to be impressed with. Taylor made a comment about our shooters, and we jokingly told them that the alcohol unlocked our true ski potential or something dumb like that, which they found funny. To our surprise, Devin pulled out an unmarked bottle and taunted us, calling us bitches for sticking to a drink as tame as Fireball. The four of us welcomed the challenge and happily swigged some of their bottle, which I could tell sent Rylan a little over the edge. He tends to drink more than he could handle, so this wasn't too surprising. I made a note not to drink too much because something about this whole situation just rubbed me the wrong way. I still had trouble believing that these two girls would want anything to do with some dumb kids like us, especially since we were all wearing helmets, and our faces weren't exactly visible. Things were going really well, though. Amir was being his usual overly flirtatious self, but Taylor seemed like she was into it, so I didn't complain. I figured we were just going to spend the remainder of our time on the slope with these girls, which I didn't really mind too much. Hell, maybe they knew something we could do after the slopes closed. Just then, Devin asked us if we had skied down a trail called Devil's Forest, a name which I definitely didn't recognize. Our other friend, Chase, would have had the trail map memorized as he's literally a walking GPS, but he wasn't with us. We told them we hadn't, and they explained that it was a glade trail that's a little obscure and rarely open. For those who don't know, glades are basically trails that extend in between trees, so that you're skiing through a forest. We actually enjoyed skiing glades more than anything else, so this Devil's Forest trail piqued our interest. We told them we were game, and they motioned for us to follow them. We reached a choke point on our skis, and they told us to take them off, because we had to walk slightly uphill for a short while. I could tell we were in a relatively desolate part of the mountain, as the snow was perfectly fresh, and there was no one around. The thought of an adventure was invigorating though, so I thought nothing of it. Drunk and curious, we clipped our skis off and followed the girls up the mountain. Amir and Rylan ran ahead, presumably to flirt some more with them, and Jaden and I hung back a little bit to give some space. As we followed, I could tell Jaden looked a little wary, so I asked him what was on his mind. I like to think of us as the rational, level-headed ones in the group. Amira was too unpredictable and impulsive, and Rylan would follow a girl if she led him off a cliff. Jaden said that it was weird that this supposed trail would be inaccessible from a ski lift, which I agreed with. I had never had to walk uphill to reach a trail before. We agreed to just keep a keen eye on things. What could two girls? It was due to a group of four big guys anyway. They led us into the forest, and the terrain finally started leveling out. Jaden and I caught up with the group, and it was apparent that Rylan and Amir had both made considerable progress. Rylan had his arm around Devin, who was smiling and laughing. They pointed in the same direction we had been traveling, which had all of a sudden become a downward slope. I sighed, knowing this was another instance where we could have used Chase's help. He would have known exactly where we were and where this would have led. Jaden was still skeptical and asked the girls if they were sure that this was a real trail. They responded yes and told us that it would also take us right back to the lifts. Before I could say anything, Devin pulled the bottle out again and told us we had to finish it. Amir and Rylan happily took some hefty swigs, but when the bottle got around to Jaden, he said he was drunk enough. As soon as he spoke, I could have sworn Devin's smile became a really angry scowl for a split second, but by the time I blinked, she was smiling again. I must have been the only one to notice because I looked around at my friends and their expressions were all normal. She put on a seductive smile and batted her eyes at Jaden, asking him nicely, He reluctantly grabbed the bottle if just to shut her up. By the time it got to me, I put the bottle up to my mouth but didn't actually drink. Everything about this encounter was triggering alarm bells suddenly in my head. I handed the bottle back to Devin, who put it away. I noted that neither another girl drank this time around. It dawned on me that I hadn't seen either one of them drink anything this whole time. I checked my phone half an hour until the lifts closed. I tried to come up with some excuse for why we couldn't ski this trail, saying that we wouldn't have enough time to get back up and down the mountain to where we had parked. The girls insisted that we'd have enough time and that the lifts were connected on the bottom anyway. Then, without warning, they told us that we were wasting too much time and took off toward the slope, telling us to follow them if we could. Amir and Rylan immediately followed, clearly hoping for a favorable outcome at the bottom. Jaden and I obviously didn't want to, but figured we had no choice but to follow. So that's what we did. I let Jaden lead the way because, after all, this was still a challenging-looking slope, and skiing in the forest is no joke. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but when we made it to the bottom, I was relieved. The four of them were at the bottom of the slope, laughing and flirting like they had been before. Jaden and I caught up with the group, but something was wrong. There wasn't a lift in sight. We were still surrounded by forest on all sides. I sternly asked the girls where the lift was, and they told me to stop worrying and that it was close by. Then they said they'd take us there in a few minutes. I relaxed a little, assuming that I was worried this whole time about nothing. As I was rubbing my eyes, I heard a distinct thump in the snow. I opened them to see Rylan, who was literally passed out on his back in the snow. The girls laughed, calling him a lightweight, but I could tell it was more serious than that. Before I could even react, Amir slumped over too, started freaking out, and I rushed over to them, unclipping my skis. I thanked my lucky stars that they seemed to be breathing normally, but I was beyond horrified. Jaden took a step towards the girls, asking them what the hell was going on. They seemed genuinely shocked, saying they have no idea what was wrong. Jaden took another step before he too passed out in the snow. I stared in shock, still trying to wrap my head around the gravity of the situation. I just couldn't fathom that this was happening to us. My head started spinning and I was sure that I was next. The girls had stopped pretending by now, and they looked at me like they were waiting for me to pass out. I felt myself getting dizzy, so I sat down in the snow, even though I wanted to stay on my feet. I demanded to know what they had given us. They didn't respond or even move that matter. I yelled at them over and over again, but they still didn't react. I wanted to get up, but I quite literally couldn't stand. I didn't pass out, though. I kept my eyes open the whole time. Eventually, Taylor turned to Devin and said something along the lines of, "He must have not drank enough." This is gonna sound a little weird, but bear with me. Every winter, my friends Kyle, Ricky, and I have this little tradition of walking out onto this frozen lake a few towns over. It's not some grand event or anything. We just do it for fun. There's something about the vibe of being out there on the ice, surrounded by the quiet stillness that feels almost otherworldly. It's just one of those simple things I've always enjoyed. Call us weird, but we can never get enough of the serenity. If you've ever been out in nature by yourself, with the only sound being the gentle pattern of snowflakes, you know what I'm talking about. It feels like you've got a piece of nature all to yourself. The photos always turn out great too, which is a huge plus for a couple of edgy guys like us. This happened this past winter. It's April as I'm writing this, so about 4 months ago now. I know what you're probably thinking, but don't worry, none of us fell through the ice. That's not what this story is about. It was snowing pretty heavily that night, which was the main reason we decided to go. It had been consistently below freezing for a couple of weeks too, so we were relatively confident the lake was completely frozen over. I'd personally take winter over summer any day of the week. I bet all my friends would agree. There are about a million reasons why, but one of them is as simple as the snowfall itself. First of all, it's just pretty. What I like most about it, though, is that you'll never find yourself in complete darkness. Even after sunset, the world isn't entirely dark. The light reflecting off the white snow blends day and night. So you're left with this really surreal feeling that doesn't arise from anything else. The moon was also pretty full that night, So that feeling was amplified. Kyle was driving that night. He had a pickup that handled pretty well in the snow. So we just played it safe and let him drive, even though Ricky was usually the one who chauffeured us around. The lake itself is surrounded by a thin forest, so we couldn't actually drive all the way to the water's edge. I don't think forest is the right word. It's really just a cluster of sparsely scattered trees, but it's more than enough to prevent a car from driving through. We parked in a nearby lot and got out of the car. It was freezing out. The three of us bundled up and walked toward the lake. I didn't smoke at the time. I still don't, but Ricky and Kyle both do. So they lit a couple of cigarettes as we walked. I think it was after midnight, but I can't say for sure. All I remember is that there wasn't a soul out there. Not an animal, not a person. Nothing. No movement whatsoever besides the three of us. We reached the lake, and as we anticipated, it seemed completely frozen over. The three of us were laughing about something stupid when Kyle picked up a small boulder and chucked it onto the ice. Testing its integrity, it didn't even crack. So we took that as an indication to make our way towards the middle of the lake. We obviously didn't go super far on the ice. That would have been careless, but we did venture a decent ways away from the ledge. We were maybe 100 feet beat out when something caught our attention. On the far side of the lake, near the edge where the trees bordered the ice, something big and dark was moving. We stopped talking immediately. We just stopped in our tracks watching. Whatever it was large, hunched over and moving slowly toward the lake. Finally, we realized what we were looking at. It was a bear. Ricky was the first to say something. He whispered, "Is that a bear?" as quietly as he could. I didn't answer. My heart was already racing. If it was a bear, the last thing we wanted to do is draw its attention. We stood there frozen, not even daring to breathe too loudly. But then as the figure moved closer, something felt off. But the way it walked wasn't quite right. Too upright, too human. It also looked like there was something dragging behind it. Nothing about it made sense. It was one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. And that's when it straightened up completely, and we realized the truth all at once. It wasn't a bear. It was a person wearing some bear suit. Kyle said, "What the hell?" in a low voice, and I was thinking the same exact thing. I know it doesn't sound scary in a generic sense, but if you had been there, you would have been terrified too. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I don't know if I was more afraid or confused, but something told me to stay quiet. The figure kept moving toward the ice, dragging something behind him. At first, it was hard to tell what it was. The snow blurred the details, but as he got closer, I realized he was holding a rope that was attached to the thing he was dragging. And a few moments later, we could see it more clearly. It was a small black bag. It looked like a smaller-sized garbage bag if they even made those. Either way, it was chilling. We stood there unsure of what to do. My mind was screaming at me to turn around and leave, but my body felt paralyzed. I couldn't move. I don't think Ricky and Kyle were too keen on turning around and leaving, either because neither one of them flinched. I probably wouldn't have left right then, even if I hadn't been so scared. I needed to know what that person was doing. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any stranger, the man unzipped and stepped out of the bear suit. Seeing him as a person didn't make things any better. He wasn't particularly large or intimidating, but there was something unsettling about him. We watched as he bent down, presumably to pick up a rock, but I couldn't tell from so far away. Then the sound started. He knelt down holding what looked like a rock and began repeatedly slamming it into the ice. So we took that as an indication to make our way towards the middle of the lake. We obviously didn't go super far on the ice. That would have been careless, but we did venture a decent ways away from the ledge. We were maybe 100 feet beat out when something caught our attention. On the far side of the lake, near the edge where the trees bordered the ice, something big and dark was moving. We stopped talking immediately. We just stopped in our tracks watching. Whatever it was large, hunched over and moving slowly toward the lake. Finally, we realized what we were looking at. It was a bear. Ricky was the first to say something. He whispered, "Is that a bear?" as quietly as he could. I didn't answer. My heart was already racing. If it was a bear, the last thing we wanted to do is draw its attention. We stood there frozen, not even daring to breathe too loudly. But then as the figure moved closer, something felt off. But the way it walked wasn't quite right. Too upright, too human. It also looked like there was something dragging behind it. Nothing about it made sense. It was one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. And that's when it straightened up completely, and we realized the truth all at once. It wasn't a bear. It was a person wearing some bear suit. Kyle said, "What the hell?" in a low voice, and I was thinking the same exact thing. I know it doesn't sound scary in a generic sense, but if you had been there, you would have been terrified too. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I don't know if I was more afraid or confused, but something told me to stay quiet. The figure kept moving toward the ice, dragging something behind him. At first, it was hard to tell what it was. The snow blurred the details, but as he got closer, I realized he was holding a rope that was attached to the thing he was dragging. And a few moments later, we could see it more clearly. It was a small black bag. It looked like a smaller-sized garbage bag if they even made those. Either way, it was chilling. We stood there unsure of what to do. My mind was screaming at me to turn around and leave, but my body felt paralyzed. I couldn't move. I don't think Ricky and Kyle were too keen on turning around and leaving, either because neither one of them flinched. I probably wouldn't have left right then, even if I hadn't been so scared. I needed to know what that person was doing. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any stranger, the man unzipped and stepped out of the bear suit. Seeing him as a person didn't make things any better. He wasn't particularly large or intimidating, but there was something unsettling about him. We watched as he bent down, presumably to pick up a rock, but I couldn't tell from so far away. Then the sound started. He knelt down holding what looked like a rock and began repeatedly slamming it into the ice.